among regulatory agencies. And I want to ask Mr. Weimer and Mr. Kupritz, what are the safety implications of PHMSA having to undergo a cost-benefit analysis where it must have quantifiable benefits that exceed cost before being able to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking? And why do you recommend Congress eliminate this unique requirement for PHMSA? So, Mr. Weimer, if you can go first.
Sure, thank you for the question. We recognize as the cost-benefit in the statute as being unique. I think PHMSA, pipeline safety side, is one of the few agencies that has such a thing. We don't disagree that cost benefit's an important thing to look at during regulations, but it's required of all regulators as part of OMB and through executive orders. But since it's in the statute, it gives the industry a unique legal hook to argue with regulations. And the way that works is, I think somebody earlier today asked what the value of human life is. And when you do the cost-benefit analysis that PHMSA uses, they use a figure of about $9 or $10 million as the benefit of a human life. So if you have a tragedy like San Bruno that kills 8 people and you go through a cost-benefit to look at installing new valves on a pipeline, and you say that over the course of 10 years you're going to prevent 10 lives from being lost, that would be worth about $100 million. At the same time, if you look at what the cost would be for the industry to put a valve on every mile of pipeline that it might be required, like based on the NTSB recommendations, it may be that those valves, and I'm just making numbers up, cost $1 million a piece, and you might have to put 400 of them nationwide. So that's worth $400 million. So the cost of implementing automated valves way outweighs the benefit of the human lives you're going to save. Now, that was a very basic overview, and it's much more complex, but that's the way the statute works, and that industry can go to court then and argue that the statute wasn't based on cost-benefit because it's in the statute. You can't argue that just at OMB, where it does make sense to weigh those things. So that's why we think it should be removed.
Mr. Kupritz, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I'd ask, in my 20 years kind of watching the development and promulgation of pipeline safety regulations in the fields, I've seen PHMSA's frustration in trying to push development of some very good ideas, and the cost-benefit process slows the whole thing down, and then it gets lost in, in bureaucratic procedures on many things. And so my comment earlier about, I used to think $1 billion was a lot of money in terms of some of these tragedies, and you've heard just a few that I've investigated today in more detail. The analysis is all wrong. The nature of the failures are such that cost-benefit does not set itself up. Its primary objective from where I stand is to deregulate. So let's call it what it is. Now, it's up to Congress to decide how they want to deal with that.
And that's a very interesting point you raised about the actually measuring the benefits. So it's something we're going to have to look at closely here. But I want to move on to Chief Eggleston. And I want to ask, what can Congress do to improve the information sharing between pipeline operators and local communities and emergency responders so you have the type of information that you need?
Well, we truly believe that point of contact is best handled through the LEPCs, that they're throughout the nation been proven to help share information across localities in terms of hazards in their areas. So continue to help fund the grant programs that support the LEPCs, as we think is the best way to go forward.
I know when I mentioned in my opening statement that in Romeoville, in my district, there's a leak, and the story is that the leak was detected, and someone had to go walk along the pipeline to figure out, get any information on whose pipeline this was, to even know who to contact, and it'd be much better if that information was available along with other information. I want to quickly ask, in the short amount of time, just a quick question, Mr. Holstein. You talked about, and I had read about Google finding, going around with their mapping, finding the leaks. What happened with that information? Was it actually used to fix leaks, or what happened?
We posted that information, Mr. Chairman, on our website, and so anyone can see it today. And we specifically encouraged local citizens in those communities, places like Boston and Indianapolis and 8 other cities around the country, encouraged people to discuss that amount of leakage. In many older cities in particular, we found there was a great deal of leakage. However, we were careful to say that we were not challenging the classification system that's used by PHMSA and by gas distribution utilities in terms of the decisions they make about how quickly to respond, how urgently to respond to different types of leaks. After all, a big leak out in a field is less of a safety threat than a small leak in a small apartment. So mostly what we were trying to demonstrate is that new technologies exist to do very accurate and very inexpensive and also very rapid surveys of, in that case, streets in major cities. But the same kinds of technologies can be deployed elsewhere.
Thank you. My time's expired. I now will recognize Mr. Balderson.